The documents hit the cold marble coffee table with a sound like a gavel, an execution of a life they had built together. He stood there, a silhouette against the glittering Chicago skyline, his face unreadable. "I want a divorce." He said the words as sterile as the penthouse around them. She felt the tiny flutter in her womb, a secret she had planned to share in celebration, now a weapon she held in silence. He thought he was leaving his quiet, unassuming wife for a new, glamorous life. He had no idea the woman he was discarding was the only one who could see the viper's nest he was stepping into, and she had the proof to burn it all to the ground. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's the story of a catastrophic miscalculation, and the day a silent wife found her voice in a silent courtroom. The silence in their minimalist Chicago penthouse was louder than any argument they'd ever had. It stretched across the vast, open-plan living room, clung to the floor-to-ceiling windows, and pooled in the space between Sophia and Elliot Montgomery. For 12 years that space had been filled with laughter, whispered secrets, and the easy comfort of a shared life. Now it was a chasm. Elliot stood by the window, his back to her, looking out at the city lights that twinkled like a carpet of fallen stars. He wore a Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than her first car. He always looked the part of Elliot Montgomery, heir to the Montgomery & Sons construction empire, a legacy built on steel concrete and 3 generations of ruthless ambition. Sophia sat on the custom Italian leather sofa, her hands resting protectively on her stomach. She was just over 3 months pregnant, a fragile secret she had been nurturing, waiting for the perfect moment to tell him. She had imagined a romantic dinner, a tiny pair of shoes in a gift box, the look of joy that would finally soften the hard edges that had been forming around him for the past year. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The thick sheaf of papers he had tossed on the table sat between them. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The words were clinical, brutal. He turned, and the indifference in his eyes was what broke her first. It wasn't anger or sadness. It was a chilling void. "It's not complicated, Sophia. We've grown apart. I've met someone." "Someone?" The word was a puff of air, incredulous. "Her name is Genevieve Langley," he said, as if reciting a stock market ticker. "She's a VP of acquisitions at Sterling Corp. She understands my world. The pressures, the ambition, the unspoken words hung in the air. Everything you don't." Sophia, the former financial analyst who had given up her own promising career at his request to become the perfect corporate wife, the gracious hostess, the quiet support system, the one who managed their homes, their charities, their entire life, so he could focus on being Elliot Montgomery. "For how long?" she asked the question, tearing at her throat. "A little over a year. A year. A year of lies. A year of late nights he'd blamed on work, of business trips he'd taken alone, of the growing emotional distance she had foolishly believed was just stress from his new venture. He was launching a subsidiary, a high-risk, high-reward tech development firm he called Nightingale Innovations, designed to modernize the old-world construction business. He had been consumed by it, and she had given him the space to be. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sharp. "A year, Elliot. And you just decide to end 12 years of marriage. Like this?" "It's cleaner this way," he said, his voice flat. "Our lawyers can handle the specifics. I'm being more than generous. The settlement will ensure you're comfortable for the rest of your life." Comfortable. He spoke of her future as if it were a transaction, a line item on a balance sheet. The love, the history, the vows they had taken, all of it, reduced to a payoff. A wave of nausea more than just morning sickness roiled in her stomach. The joy she had felt just hours ago, the secret of their child, now felt like a lead weight. She had a choice. She could tell him use their baby as a plea, a reason to fight, to try to pull him back from the edge. But as she looked at his face, at the cold, resolute set of his jaw, she knew it wouldn't work. He hadn't just left her. He had already erased her. Telling him now would only make their child a complication in his pristine new life, a bargaining chip. So she held on to her secret. It was the only thing that was truly hers anymore. "Fine," she said, the word tasting like ash. The strength in her own voice surprised her. "Get out." For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed his face, surprise. He expected tears begging a scene. He didn't expect resolve. "This is my home, Sophia," he said with a touch of his old arrogance. "It was our home," she corrected him. Standing up slowly, her hand never leaving her stomach. "Now it's just a property to be divided. Until the lawyers sort it out, I'm not spending another night under the same roof as you, so you can go to her." He stared at her for a long moment, then gave a slight, dismissive nod. He walked to the door without a backward glance, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. The door clicked shut, and Sophia finally let out the sob she had been holding back. She sank to the floor, her body shaking, and wrapped her arms around the tiny, precious life inside her. She was alone. She was pregnant. And her husband was building a new life with another woman. In that moment of absolute devastation, she couldn't possibly know that the venture he was so proud of, the woman he so adored, and the empire he was set to inherit, were all built on a foundation of lies far more treacherous than his own. And the clues to unraveling it all were hidden in the life he had so carelessly discarded. The days that followed were a blur of shock and logistics. Sophia moved into a residential hotel suite, a sterile, impersonal space that felt like a reflection of her new life. Her sister Kate, a fiercely protective ER nurse, was her rock fielding calls and packing boxes, while Sophia moved through the motions in a fog of grief. Elliot, true to his word, had his lawyer handle everything. The man Garrett Price was a senior partner at a top Chicago firm, known for his cutthroat tactics and his perfectly tailored suits. His first communication wasn't a phone call or a letter of condolence for the end of a marriage. It was an email with a settlement offer attached. Sophia opened it on her laptop, the hotel room's generic art mocking her from the walls. The number was, as Elliot had promised, generous. Enough to live comfortably, to never have to work again. But it came with conditions. A strict non-disclosure agreement that would prevent her from ever speaking about their marriage or the reasons for its dissolution. A waiver of any and all future claims against Elliot or the Montgomery family estate. He wasn't just divorcing her. He was buying her silence, packaging up their 12 years, and putting a price tag on it. Attached to the offer were preliminary financial disclosures. It was standard procedure, but something about them felt off. Sophia's mind, once sharp and analytical from her years on a trading floor, had been softened by years of managing a household. But instinct was harder to dull. She scrolled through the list of Elliot's assets, stocks, properties, trust funds, and then she saw the line item for Nightingale Innovations. It was listed as a private investment with a surprisingly modest valuation, especially given the way Elliot had talked about it, how he'd called it the future of the company. He'd poured millions into it. The valuation felt deliberately, almost ridiculously low. "He's hiding something," she murmured to herself. That same afternoon, she met with the lawyer Kate had found for her. Diana Walsh was the opposite of Garrett Price. Her office was in a restored brownstone, filled with books and warm wood, not glass and chrome. She was in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor that instantly put Sophia at ease. She didn't make false promises or offer platitudes. She listened. Sophia explained the situation, the suddenness of the divorce, the other woman, Genevieve Langley. She slid the settlement offer across the polished mahogany desk. Diana read through it, her expression unreadable. "It's a fortress," she said, finally looking up at Sophia. "Price has built a wall around Mr. Montgomery. The NDA is ironclad. They want a quick, clean, and silent extraction. He wants to walk away, pay a fee, and ensure you become a ghost in his past. And the financial disclosure," Sophia said, her voice finding a bit of its old professional certainty. "It's wrong. Nightingale Innovations. He's invested a fortune of his personal and family money into it. He calls it his legacy project. This valuation is a joke. It's valued at less than the seed money he put in." Diana's eyes sharpened with interest. "You think he's devaluing an asset to reduce the settlement?" "It's the oldest trick in the book," Sophia replied. "But it feels like more than that. It's too blatant. It's almost arrogant. Like he doesn't think I'm smart enough to notice." A sad smile touched Diana's lips. "In my experience, men like Elliot Montgomery often make that mistake. They get so used to their wives running the social calendar, they forget she might be perfectly capable of reading a balance sheet." She leaned forward. "Sophia, if your gut is telling you something is wrong, we should listen to it. We can reject the offer and file a motion for a forensic accounting of all his assets, specifically Nightingale." The thought was terrifying. It meant a fight. It meant court. It meant turning her private pain into a public spectacle. The offer on the table was a ticket to a quiet life. She could take the money, move to a smaller city, and raise her child in peace. But then she thought of Elliot's cold eyes. She thought of Genevieve Langley, the woman who understood his world. And she thought of the child growing inside her, a child who was half Montgomery, who was entitled to a legacy that Elliot seemed determined to hide. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the truth. It was about respect. "He underestimated me when he married me," Sophia said, a cold fire beginning to burn through the fog of her grief. "He's not going to get away with underestimating me on his way out." Diana Walsh gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Good," she said. "Then let's go to work." That night, for the first time in weeks, Sophia didn't cry herself to sleep. She sat at the hotel desk with her laptop and a legal pad. The initial rejection of the offer was sent. The battle had begun. She pulled up the Nightingale Innovations website, a slick corporate facade full of buzzwords like synergy, disruption, and next-gen logistics. It was all gloss, no substance. No client list, no project portfolio. She started digging not as a scorned wife, but as the analyst she used to be. She searched for SEC filings, for news articles, for any mention of the company outside of Elliot's own press releases. There was next to nothing. For a company supposedly poised to revolutionize a multi-billion-dollar industry, it had a phantom footprint. And then she searched for Genevieve Langley. There were plenty of photos of her at corporate events, always looking impeccable, always at the side of some powerful man. Her professional bio was impressive. Wharton MBA, a rapid rise through the ranks of the corporate world. But as Sophia cross-referenced dates and articles, a strange pattern emerged. The companies Genevieve had worked for before joining Sterling Corp. 2 of them had been driven into bankruptcy following aggressive takeovers. It was probably a coincidence, but in Sophia's gut, the spark of suspicion was beginning to grow into a flame. The motion for a forensic audit was met with immediate and aggressive resistance from Garrett Price. He filed counter-motions accusing Sophia of being a vindictive spouse on a fishing expedition, attempting to harass his client and disrupt a legitimate business enterprise out of spite. The legal battle began to drain Sophia's initial savings, but Diana was steadfast. "This is a bully tactic, Sophia," Diana assured her during a late-night call. "The more aggressively they fight to keep something hidden, the more certain we can be that there's something there worth finding." The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Maria Holloway, eventually granted a limited audit, but it was a frustrating process. Price's team stonewalled at every turn, producing redacted documents and citing proprietary business secrets. The numbers they did provide were a tangled mess, a web of shell corporations and holding companies that seemed designed to confuse. Sophia knew she couldn't rely on the auditors alone. They were looking for hidden money, but she was looking for a hidden story. She had to think back, to sift through the memories of the last year, not with the heart of a wife, but with the eye of an investigator. She started a journal, forcing herself to recall every small detail she had previously dismissed. Late-night phone calls Elliot would take in his study, closing the door firmly behind him. Hushed, tense conversations, where she'd only catch snippets of words, the firewall, plausible deniability, the asset transfer. At the time, she'd assumed it was the normal high-stakes language of his business. Now, it sounded sinister. One memory stood out. It was from about 6 months ago during a charity gala. Elliot had been in a dark mood. She'd found him on a balcony on the phone, his voice a low growl. "The timeline is too aggressive, Conrad," he had hissed. "If we move the funds before the platform is stable, we risk exposure." Sophia had thought nothing of the name Conrad then. Elliot knew hundreds of people. Now she typed Conrad and Chicago Finance into a search engine. The results were immediate. Conrad Beck, a notorious corporate raider, a vulture capitalist known for hostile takeovers. He would identify established family-run companies with lazy management, acquire a significant stake through shell companies, and then use that leverage to dismantle them and sell them off for parts. His picture showed a man with cold reptilian eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. Why would Elliot, the proud heir of Montgomery & Sons, be having a secret, heated conversation with a man like Conrad Beck? They were predators from different jungles. The key had to be Nightingale. While the official audit was crawling along, Sophia started her own. She still had access to some of their old, shared cloud accounts, things Elliot had forgotten to lock her out of in his haste. She spent hours deep into the night sifting through years of digital detritus, photo albums, old vacation itineraries, and then a folder labeled Household. Inside were scans of old mortgage documents, insurance policies, and buried deep within a subfolder, a backup of Elliot's old laptop from 2 years ago. It was a digital time capsule. Most of it was useless, but as she delved into the cached files and old email archives, she found it. An early business proposal for a project codenamed Project Nightingale. But this version was different from the public one. It wasn't about innovation. It was a brutal clinical strategy outlining how to systematically devalue Montgomery & Sons' core assets by diverting them into a new independent entity. The new entity would acquire all the valuable patents, key personnel and client contracts, while the parent company would be saddled with the debt and the physical, less profitable assets. The goal was to make the parent company appear weak and inefficient, an easy target for an outside takeover. The document was authored by Elliot, but there were comments and track changes in the margins from another user, G.L. Genevieve Langley. Sophia felt the blood drain from her face. This wasn't just a business plan. It was a blueprint for patricide. Elliot, in concert with his mistress, had been planning to gut his own family's company. But why? For money, Elliot was already wealthy beyond measure. It had to be about control. His father, William Montgomery, was a domineering patriarch who still held the reins of the company, tightly treating Elliot like a perennial subordinate. This plan was Elliot's way of wresting control, of carving out his own kingdom by burning his father's down. The pieces were beginning to form a terrifying picture, but something was still missing. Conrad Beck. Where did he fit in? Was he just a consultant, or was he the endgame, the outside takeover? The real breakthrough came from an unexpected place. As part of the divorce discovery, Elliot's lawyers had to provide his credit card statements. They were heavily redacted, but they couldn't black out everything. Sophia, remembering her husband's habits, focused on his travel expenses. She cross-referenced the dates of his business trips for Nightingale with the cities listed. New York, London, Zurich, and one that stood out, a 3-day trip to the Cayman Islands. Nightingale had no business in the Caymans. On a hunch, she hired a private investigator. Diana recommended a former forensic accountant named Frank Morrison. She gave him everything she had, the business plan, Conrad Beck's name, and the dates of the Cayman trip. A week later, Frank called her. "You're not going to believe this," he said, his voice grim. "Nightingale Innovations isn't the real company. It's a front. The money that's being funneled into it is being immediately rerouted to an offshore holding company in the Caymans. That company, Langley Beck Holdings, was incorporated a year and a half ago." Langley Beck? Genevieve Langley? Conrad Beck? Sophia's heart hammered in her chest. And the owner? "It's split 50-50 between 2 trusts," Frank said. "One is registered to Genevieve Langley. The other, the beneficiary is anonymous, but the establishing charter is linked to a firm that exclusively represents one client, Conrad Beck." The air left Sophia's lungs. The entire puzzle snapped into place with sickening clarity. This was never Elliot's plan. He was a pawn, a fool. Genevieve hadn't latched on to a powerful man. She had targeted a weak one. She and her real partner, Conrad Beck, were using Elliot's resentment for his father to get him to willingly dismantle his own family's company from the inside. They would bleed Montgomery & Sons dry, funneling all its value into their offshore company. When the parent company was a hollow shell, Beck would swoop in, buy it for pennies on the dollar, and Elliot would be left with nothing but a worthless front company, and the woman who had played him for a fool. The affair wasn't the reason for the business deal. The business deal was the reason for the affair. Sophia leaned back in her chair, a cold, terrifying calm settling over her. She now understood the full scope of the betrayal. It was deeper and more absolute than she could ever have imagined. And Elliot, in his arrogance, was walking blindly into the slaughterhouse. She looked down at her now visibly pregnant belly. Her child was a Montgomery. This wasn't just about a fair divorce settlement anymore. This was about protecting her child's birthright from the jackals at the gate. "Frank," she said, her voice steady and clear, "I need you to find everything. Every wire transfer, every email, every call log between Langley and Beck. I don't just need proof for a divorce court. I need proof of a conspiracy." With Frank Morrison digging into the offshore accounts and digital communications, Sophia's role shifted. She and Diana knew that financial data, while damning, could be dry and difficult for a judge to fully appreciate in the heat of a hearing. They needed a narrative. They needed to expose the human element of the betrayal, the sheer calculated cruelty of it. Sophia's mind went back to Genevieve's public persona, the polished, untouchable corporate shark. But people like that always left a trail of whispers of disgruntled former colleagues and spurned associates. While Frank followed the money, Sophia started following the gossip. She began discreetly reaching out to a few trusted contacts from her old life in finance. She didn't mention the divorce or her suspicions. Instead, she framed her inquiries as simple curiosity about a major player. "I see Genevieve Langley is making waves at Sterling," she'd say over coffee. "She's always been a powerhouse. What's the word on her?" At first, she got the standard replies: brilliant, ambitious, a real killer in the boardroom. But Sophia persisted subtly, probing, listening for the notes of discord beneath the praise. Eventually, she found a weak link, a former junior analyst who had worked under Genevieve at her previous company, the one that had been driven into bankruptcy. The young woman named Alicia was initially hesitant to talk. Sophia met her at a quiet cafe far from the financial district. She laid her cards on the table, not all of them, but enough. "I have reason to believe Genevieve Langley is involved in unethical business practices," Sophia said calmly. "I know you signed an NDA when you left, but I'm not a reporter. This is a private legal matter. Anything you say would be protected." Alicia's composure crumbled. For 2 years, she had been carrying the weight of what she had seen. "She was a ghost," Alicia whispered, twisting a napkin in her hands. She operated outside the normal channels. She had a secret partner, someone she only ever referred to as C. They would have these encrypted chats. She once left her screen unlocked, and I saw a fragment of a conversation. They were talking about gutting the host and liquidating the legacy assets. A month later, Conrad Beck initiated his hostile takeover. We were all laid off. The company was sold for scrap. It was the confirmation she needed. Genevieve and Beck had a history. This was their modus operandi. Meanwhile, Frank was making progress. He had managed to legally subpoena the communication logs between Genevieve's corporate phone and a series of burner phones. The call times and durations lined up perfectly with key moments in Nightingale's development and major fund transfers. They had the skeleton of the conspiracy, but they still lacked the smoking gun, an explicit, undeniable piece of evidence that would tie it all together and reveal their intent in their own words. The legal battle over the divorce was escalating. Garrett Price, sensing their persistence, ramped up the pressure. He filed a motion to have Sophia's claims dismissed as frivolous, painting her in court filings as an unstable, greedy ex-wife lashing out because her husband had moved on. Elliot, insulated by Price's legal shield, seemed oblivious, consumed by his new life with Genevieve. Sophia would see paparazzi photos of them online, leaving exclusive restaurants, attending charity balls, looking like the city's new power couple. Each photo was a fresh stab of pain, but it also hardened her resolve. The final piece of the puzzle came from the most mundane of places, a shared family account for their smart home system. Elliot, in his arrogance, had never thought to remove her access. He probably didn't even remember she had it. It controlled the lights, the thermostat, the security cameras, and the audio system in the penthouse. Late one night, unable to sleep, Sophia logged in out of a morbid curiosity. She saw that the system had logs of voice commands. Play jazz music. Dim the living room lights. And then she saw it. The system also kept fragmented audio recordings of the commands to improve its AI. It was a privacy nightmare, but for Sophia, it was a long-shot possibility. She tasked Frank with a specific needle-in-a-haystack search. She gave him the dates and times of the suspicious calls from Genevieve's phone logs. See if the penthouse audio system picked up any ambient sound from Elliot's end of those calls, she requested. For days there was nothing, just fragments of music or the TV. Sophia was about to give up, believing it was a dead end. Then Frank called. He sounded different. Not just successful, shaken. "I found it, Sophia," he said, his voice low. "It's from 3 weeks ago." The date matches a 2-hour call to one of the burner phones. The system must have been triggered by a word, and it recorded a 30-second snippet. "You need to prepare yourself. It's Genevieve. She must have been on speakerphone in the penthouse with Elliot." Frank emailed her the encrypted audio file. Sophia's hand trembled as she clicked on it. Her small hotel room filled with the crystal-clear, venomous voice of Genevieve Langley. "Stop worrying about him, Conrad." Genevieve's voice purred, dripping with disdain. "Elliot is eating out of my hand. He's so desperate to prove himself to his daddy that he's literally handing us the keys to the kingdom. He thinks Nightingale is his masterpiece. The poor, stupid fool doesn't realize he's just the demolition man. Once we've transferred the last of the liquid assets, you can initiate the takeover. The board will have to accept your offer. By the time he figures out what happened, we'll be gone, and he'll be left holding the bag for bankrupting his own family. He's a means to an end, darling. A very handsome, very rich, and very, very stupid end." There was a man's low chuckle on the other end, Conrad Beck. And then, most damningly, Elliot's voice, faint but clear in the background of the penthouse. "Everything all right, honey?" he asked, his tone loving and oblivious. "Everything is perfect." Genevieve's voice cooed back, the venom instantly replaced by saccharine sweetness. "Just finalizing our glorious future." The recording ended. Sophia sat in stunned absolute silence. The clinical knowledge of the betrayal was one thing. Hearing it in all its casual cruelty was another. Hearing the woman her husband left her for mock his intelligence, his love, his entire existence while planning at his ruin. Hearing the affection in Elliot's voice as he spoke to the architect of his own destruction. She didn't feel anger or sadness anymore. She felt a profound, chilling emptiness. She had mourned the man she thought she'd married. This recording proved that man never truly existed. He was a construct of her own love and his own lies. She saved the file, labeling it Exhibit A. She copied it to 3 separate secure drives. The board was set. The pieces were in place. The hearing to finalize their divorce was scheduled for the following week. Garrett Price had filed for a summary judgment, confident that Sophia had nothing, and that the judge would force through their initial settlement offer. Elliot and Genevieve were planning their glorious future. They had no idea that their past was about to be played back to them 30 seconds at a time. The courtroom was a study in contrasts. On one side sat Elliot Montgomery, flanked by the formidable Garrett Price and his team of junior associates. Elliot looked impeccable in a charcoal grey bespoke suit, his face a mask of bored confidence. Beside him in the front row of the gallery sat Genevieve Langley. She was the picture of elegant support, dressed in a cream-colored Chanel suit. Her posture perfect, a subtle sympathetic smile gracing her lips whenever she caught a juror's eye. They looked less like defendants in a divorce proceeding, and more like royalty gracing a common affair. They radiated wealth power and the unshakable certainty that they were on the winning side of history. On the other side, there was Sophia. Her pregnancy was now obvious under her simple but professional navy blue maternity dress. She looked pale, but composed her dark hair, pulled back neatly. Next to her, Diana Walsh was an island of calm, her files arranged in precise, unassuming stacks on the table. To an outside observer, it was a classic David and Goliath scene. The scorned, pregnant wife and her small-time lawyer against the corporate titan and his legal army. Judge Holloway presided, her expression stern and impatient. She had read the filings from both sides and clearly viewed this as a straightforward, if contentious, divorce that was taking up too much of her court's time. The morning was dedicated to Garrett Price. He was a masterful performer, his voice resonating through the courtroom as he painted a picture of the divorce that was both compelling and utterly false. "Your Honor, members of the jury," he began, striding confidently in front of the judge's bench. "This is a sad but simple case, a marriage that has unfortunately run its course. My client, Mr. Elliot Montgomery, has been nothing but forthright and generous. He has offered his estranged wife a settlement that would ensure she lives a life of immense comfort and luxury, a settlement that far exceeds what is legally required." He paused, letting his words sink in. "And how has this generosity been met with gratitude, with a dignified acceptance? No. It has been met with this baseless and vindictive campaign of harassment. Mrs. Montgomery, through her counsel, has engaged in a fishing expedition, demanding access to proprietary business documents and making wild, unsubstantiated claims, all in a transparent attempt to extort a larger settlement from a man whose only crime was to fall out of love." He gestured towards Sophia, his expression a blend of pity and condescension. "We understand that divorce is painful. We understand that emotions run high. But the courtroom is not the place for personal vendettas. It is a place for facts. And the facts are simple. Mr. Montgomery wants to move on with his life, and Mrs. Montgomery is attempting to punish him for it." He then called Elliot to the stand. Elliot was smooth, polished, and utterly convincing. He spoke of his love for Sophia in the past tense as something precious that had regrettably faded. He described their lives as having diverged his world of high-stakes business, becoming something she could no longer be a part of. "I wanted to protect her from that pressure," Elliot said, his voice laced with feigned sincerity. The launch of Nightingale Innovations was all-consuming. It required a partner who understood that world. I met Genevieve, and I realized what I had been missing. It was a painful realization, but an honest one. Price then led him through questions about the settlement. "Mr. Montgomery, would you characterize your offer to your wife as fair?" "More than fair," Elliot said, looking directly at the judge. "I wanted to ensure Sophia would never have to worry about money again. It's the least I could do to honor the years we had together." Price then addressed the issue of Nightingale. "Your wife's counsel has made accusations that you have deliberately undervalued your new company to defraud her. What do you say to that?" Elliot let out a short, humorless laugh. "Nightingale is a startup. It's a high-risk venture. It has massive potential. Yes, but right now it's all potential. It has debt. It has enormous overhead. The valuation our accountants provided is accurate, even conservative. The accusation is absurd. It's hurtful." He looked over at Sophia, a flicker of what looked like genuine disappointment in his eyes. He truly believed his own lies. He saw himself as the magnanimous, misunderstood visionary, and her as the bitter woman who couldn't accept his greatness. By the time Garrett Price rested his case, the atmosphere in the courtroom was thick with sympathy for Elliot. The judge looked annoyed with Sophia's side for wasting her time. The jury members were glancing at Sophia with expressions of pity, as if she were a woman clinging desperately and foolishly to a man who had clearly moved on. Genevieve allowed herself a small, triumphant smile, reaching out to squeeze Elliot's hand as he returned to his seat. Their victory seemed not just likely, but inevitable. They had controlled the narrative completely. Judge Holloway looked at Diana Walsh. "Ms. Walsh, I hope you have something more substantive than innuendo. The court's patience is not infinite." "I do, Your Honor," Diana said, rising slowly. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. "I have something very substantive." She picked up the top file from her neat stack. "The plaintiff has presented a story of a simple, faded love. We are here today to present a different story. A story of a sophisticated multi-million-dollar conspiracy to defraud not just my client, but an entire company and its legacy." Garrett Price shot to his feet. "Objection. Counsel is trafficking in fantasy." "Overruled," Judge Holloway said, a flicker of interest in her eyes. "For now, proceed, Ms. Walsh, but be warned this had better lead somewhere." "Oh, it does, Your Honor," Diana said, turning to face the jury. "It leads right to the heart of Nightingale Innovations." Sophia took a deep, steadying breath. The first act of their carefully constructed play was over. The second act was about to begin. Diana Walsh began not with an accusation, but with a simple document displayed on the large courtroom monitors, the original incorporation papers for Nightingale Innovations. "Mr. Montgomery," Diana said, calling Elliot back to the stand. "You've testified that Nightingale is a high-risk startup you founded. Is that correct?" "Yes, that's correct," Elliot answered, looking slightly annoyed at being recalled. "Then can you explain this?" Diana clicked a button, and a new document appeared on the screen, a wire transfer confirmation for the initial seed money, $5 million, from Elliot's personal account. But the recipient wasn't Nightingale Innovations. It was a company named Langley Beck Holdings, registered in the Cayman Islands. Elliot stared at the screen, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. That's just a holding company, for tax purposes, a standard financial structure." Garrett Price was on his feet again. "Your Honor, my client's financial structuring is complex and proprietary." "It's about to become very simple, Your Honor," Diana said, cutting him off. She put up the next document, the charter for Langley Beck Holdings. This charter, filed 1.5 years ago, establishes two primary beneficiaries. One is a trust controlled by Ms. Genevieve Langley. She paused, letting the jury absorb the name. The other is a trust managed by a firm whose sole client is Mr. Conrad Beck. For those in the jury unfamiliar with the name, Mr. Beck is a financier who specializes in the art of the hostile takeover. The air in the courtroom shifted. The boredom was gone, replaced by a tense curiosity. Elliot's confident posture faltered. He shot a confused look at Genevieve, who remained perfectly still, her face a pale, frozen mask. "Mere Montgomery," Diana continued, her voice relentless. "Are you in business with Conrad Beck?" "No, of course not," Elliot said a little too quickly. "I've met him, but we are not partners." "Then can you explain why the seed money for your company went into a shell corporation controlled by your mistress and a corporate raider?" I authorized Genevieve to structure the financials," Elliot stammered. "She's the expert. She handles all of that." "I see," Diana said, her tone dripping with false understanding. "So you, the CEO, had no knowledge that your company's finances were being channeled through an offshore entity controlled by your girlfriend, and a man famous for dismantling companies like your father's." The trap was sprung. If Elliot admitted he knew he was a conspirator. If he claimed ignorance, he was a fool, a puppet. He chose ignorance. I was focused on the technology, the vision, he said weakly. I trusted Genevieve with the details. Diana then moved to the next phase of her attack. She presented a detailed analysis prepared by Frank Morrison, showing a systematic flow of funds. Over the past year, more than $50 million in assets, patents, and key client contracts had been transferred from Montgomery & Sons to Nightingale Innovations for pennies on the dollar under the guise of internal restructuring, a restructuring Elliot had personally authorized. And from Nightingale, the value was immediately funneled to the offshore account. The courtroom was silent, captivated. The jury was leaning forward. Judge Holloway had taken off her glasses, her eyes fixed on the evidence. What had started as a divorce hearing was rapidly transforming into a corporate inquest. "This wasn't a startup, Mr. Montgomery," Diana declared, her voice rising. "This was a hijacking. You weren't building a new company. You were the inside man, hollowing out your own family's legacy and handing its most valuable parts to your mistress and her partner." "That's a lie," Elliot shouted, his composure finally shattering. He looked desperately at Genevieve, but she wouldn't meet his eyes. Her own were darting towards the exit. "Is it a lie?" Diana asked softly. "Or is it simply a truth you were never meant to discover?" She looked at the judge. "Your Honor, we have one final piece of evidence to present. It is an audio recording." Garrett Price lunged for the microphone. "Objection, illegal recording, invasion of privacy." "The recording was legally obtained, Your Honor," Diana stated calmly. "It was captured inadvertently by the smart home audio system in the plaintiff's and defendant's former shared residence, a system to which my client still had legal access. It is ambient audio from the home. We believe it will clarify the true nature of the relationship between Mr. Montgomery, Ms. Langley, and their joint enterprise." Judge Holloway hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded grimly. "Play it." The clerk hit the button, and Genevieve Langley's voice, clear and cold, filled the silent courtroom. "Stop worrying about him, Conrad. Elliot is eating out of my hand. He's so desperate to prove himself to his daddy that he's literally handing us the keys to the kingdom." Elliot froze. The color drained from his face, leaving a sickly, waxy pallor. He looked as if he had been physically struck. "The poor, stupid fool doesn't realize he's just the demolition man." Gasps rippled through the gallery. The jurors stared, mouths agape, first at the speakers, then at the stone-faced Genevieve, then at the utterly broken man on the witness stand. Garrett Price slowly sank into his chair, his face ashen. He knew the case wasn't just lost, it was annihilated. By the time he figures out what happened, we'll be gone, and he'll be left holding the bag for bankrupting his own family. He's a means to an end, darling. A very handsome, very rich, and very, very stupid end. The recording concluded with the sound of Conrad Beck's chuckle and Elliot's own oblivious, loving voice, asking if everything was all right. The clip ended. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the low hum of the courtroom's air conditioning. It was a silence so profound, so heavy with shock and ruin, that it felt like a physical weight. Every eye was on Elliot Montgomery. His face had crumpled, the arrogant mask stripped away, to reveal a man utterly destroyed not by his wife, but by his own colossal foolishness. He stared at Genevieve, his eyes wide with the horror of a complete and absolute betrayal. Genevieve herself was on her feet, her face a mask of panic, grabbing her purse and pushing her way towards the door, only to be stopped by a bailiff at the judge's subtle signal. The silence was finally broken by Judge Holloway. She cleared her throat, her voice low and laced with fury. "Mr. Price," she said, her gaze like ice, "I believe we are done here for today, and I suggest you advise your client to prepare for a conversation not just with this court, but likely with the district attorney's office." The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The story exploded, becoming the biggest scandal to hit Chicago's corporate and social scenes in a generation. The Nightingale Conspiracy, the papers called it. The scorned wife trope was obliterated, replaced by the image of Sophia Peterson, the quiet genius who had single-handedly uncovered a massive corporate fraud scheme. For Elliot and Genevieve, the ruin was absolute. Judge Holloway not only ruled on the divorce, but also took the unprecedented step of freezing all assets related to Nightingale Innovations and Langley Beck Holdings, citing clear evidence of criminal conspiracy and fraud. She referred the entire case to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Genevieve Langley and Conrad Beck were indicted within weeks on charges of wire fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement. Genevieve's carefully constructed career and social standing vanished overnight. She was a pariah, her name synonymous with treachery. Elliot's fate was in many ways more tragic. He wasn't indicted. Diana and Sophia had made it clear he was the pawn, not the mastermind, but he lost everything of value anyway. He lost his wife, his mistress, his reputation, and most devastatingly, his family. His father, William Montgomery, a man of iron and pride, publicly disowned him. The son who had tried to burn down his father's kingdom was now an exile with no kingdom of his own. The divorce settlement was no longer a negotiation. The court awarded Sophia a staggering 70% of Elliot's personal assets and, most importantly, transferred his entire stake in Montgomery & Sons and the now frozen Nightingale Innovations directly to her in trust for their unborn child. Sophia never saw Elliot again after that day in court. She heard he had left Chicago, moving somewhere quiet and anonymous to live on the diminished remains of a trust fund his mother had set up for him years ago. He was a ghost in his own story. 6 months later, Sophia gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Lily. Lily Montgomery Peterson. She wanted her daughter to have both names, the legacy she had saved and the name of the woman who had saved it. But Sophia's story didn't end with the birth of her daughter or the ruin of her enemies. The court's ruling had made her the majority shareholder in the assets of Nightingale Innovations. Those assets, stripped of the fraudulent scheme, were still immensely valuable patents, contracts, and technology that Elliot had successfully pried away from the parent company. Montgomery & Sons was crippled, teetering on the edge of the bankruptcy Elliot had inadvertently engineered. William Montgomery, humbled and aged by his son's betrayal, was forced to step down as CEO. The board was in chaos. It was Diana Walsh who first proposed the idea. "You hold the keys, Sophia," she said, visiting her in the hospital. "You control the very assets Montgomery & Sons needs to survive. You can sell them back, or you can go back." And so 2 months after Lily was born, Sophia Peterson walked into the Montgomery & Sons boardroom. She wasn't the quiet, supportive wife they vaguely remembered from holiday parties. She was a major shareholder, a woman who knew their company's books better than they did, and the only person who held the pieces needed to make them whole again. She didn't do it for revenge or for power. She did it for Lily. She presented a recovery plan, a merger of Nightingale's innovative tech with the parent company's foundational strength. It was brilliant, precise, and undeniable. The board, desperate and cornered, voted unanimously to appoint her as the new interim CEO of Montgomery & Sons. The final scene of the drama took place not in a courtroom, but in the sprawling corner office that had once belonged to William Montgomery and had been destined for Elliot. Sophia stood at the vast window, the same Chicago skyline spread before her. It was the same view from the penthouse where her old life had been shattered. But now she wasn't looking at it as a prisoner in a gilded cage. She was looking at it as a queen surveying her domain. Her phone buzzed. It was a picture from Kate of baby Lily, smiling in her crib. Sophia smiled a real, genuine smile of peace and triumph. She had faced the worst kind of betrayal, not with tears or pleas, but with intelligence, courage, and a mother's unshakable will to protect her child. She had lost a husband, but had found herself. And in doing so, she hadn't just saved a legacy. She had built her own. The silence that now filled her office wasn't one of absence or loss. It was the quiet, powerful hum of a new beginning. What an incredible journey of resilience and vindication. Sophia's story is a powerful reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most observant, and underestimating someone can be a fatal mistake. Her transformation from a heartbroken pregnant wife into a corporate savior is a testament to the strength that can be found in the face of devastating betrayal. She didn't just win a divorce case. She reclaimed her power, protected her child's future, and rewrote her own destiny. What do you think was the most shocking moment of the trial? Was it the financial trail to the Cayman Islands, or the final damning audio recording? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by Sophia's journey from silent victim to triumphant hero, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves a story of justice being served. And for more gripping real-life dramas, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.